Right, so once Keir Starmer's Labour see their polling go into freefall faster than a bungee jumper with a lead weight attached, with mutinous grumblings happening already amongst backbenchers that Starmer and Reeves are leading them to utter destruction as a party, Starmer himself has committed what I would argue the most cardinal sin a man with his background possibly could. Because for as much as he's widely despised for hitting pensioners, threatening benefit claimants, out-fashing Nigel Farage over migrants, and sending the economy into decline with that George Osbornomics omnishambles of a budget, and not to mention, of course, the matter of supporting war crimes by still aiding and abetting Israel, his attack on the justice system really ought to be the wake-up call for anyone still hanging in there who voted for him and still giving him a chance to prove himself. Because here we have him taking a big Boxing Day-style dump on his own profession, his own career history, everything he has made a name for himself over, for good or ill. And this matters, because it strikes at the very heart of everything this guy says he believes in, or we thought he did with his barrister and KC track record. And if this is what he actually thinks of it, if this is what he wants to do, no wonder people don't consider him a serious legal professional, especially in light of various scandals attached to his name, because he's proving them right, and questions everything he says people can believe in. Because if he can do this, does he really believe in anything? Right, so Keir Starmer is once again at the centre of another policy scandal, all of his own doing, and the reason for that is because of his background as a lawyer in this case. We're talking judicial reforms here, but these are anything but good. These are frankly insane, actually, and scream of a deranged commitment to not put money into anything, but to resolve governmental problems Labour inherited on the cheap. Starmer has traded on his background in law as a KC, as that Director of Public Prosecutions overseeing the Crown Prosecution Service, as a driving factor in selling himself as someone who can get things done to the country, as a go-getter, as a fixer. But what he is proposing to now do in the judicial system now gives the total reverse view of that, and once more tells people that this guy that we're seemingly stuck with for the next 4.5 years as a Prime Minister just told those stories of his time as DPP, repeated as nauseam, as they were to sell him to us, were nothing he believed in at all in actual fact, not even believing, it seems, in the importance of due diligence in the judicial process, which strikes at the centre of what he is planning to do next. The Tories, as they did with most things when they were in power, left the judicial system in a complete and utter state, with people like Dominic Raab twice and Brandon Lewis, amongst a too large number of others, having held that role in recent years for the Tory party when in government. It's little wonder it was in a complete state, as every other department in the entire country is. The role now is held by Shabana Mahmood, but forget about her for a moment, because there is little reason on the face of it, no matter who the PM or the Justice Secretary is, to hope matters are going to be fixed meaningfully now Labour are in charge. When on one hand they've literally handed the job of conducting a review into the court system to yet another former Tory Justice Secretary. That was nice of them. I bet they thought they were clever doing that. But in this case it was Theresa May's chap, David Gauke. Remember, Starmer talks about standing for change. How does it change when former Tories who held this role previously are now doing work in this department for Labour? All in it together? Absolutely right they are. Now, Gauke wasn't a fan of those who came after him, notably the blonde buffoon Boris Johnson. But if moderate Toryism, if we could even call that, or believe in such a thing, is where Labour under Starmer is now, well, it's not what people voted for, is it? But it isn't a surprise to a lot of us either that this is where he's gone. That said, what is being proposed here is anything but moderate in actuality. And if you're wondering if I'm ever going to get to the point of this by now, yes I am, now the groundwork has been set. You see, Gauke's recommendations came out on the 12th of December to absolutely zero fanfare in the mainstream media. I went looking for coverage of it in the MSM, as I often do when researching a story, to see what they've said, and often more importantly what they haven't said. And aside from an independent story the day before release, you'd think nothing at all was happening to our justice system. It is quite bonkers how badly our media are failing us, especially when the ramifications of what is going on are so important. Whilst on the subject of the media, though, one consequence of Gauke's work is the launching of a review now into our criminal court system. And this is going to be conducted by Brian Leveson. Remember him? The same guy who made recommendations into media reform, of which half of it got ditched and never became law because it didn't suit our politicians. Yet when it comes to how ne'er-do-wells in our society face justice, well, that could well be a very different matter. Leveson, however, did good work on media reform. It's a pity his full recommendations were not adopted. So we can hope that his review of what Starmer and co want to do will go a long way to rubbishing these plans, which will, I'm sure, hamper Starmer's reputation all the harder as well, and deservedly so. Now, Gawk's recommendations are quite mad, as you'd expect Tory plans to be, and Starmer and Mahmood's support for them is equally as daft too. Thank goodness for this review, in which case, though, as we know from Leveson's last one, they aren't legally binding or will necessarily be adopted. But we should be concerned by what we're looking at here with this justice reform. The main cause for concern is in relation to court case backlogs. Right now, rape victims, for example, have to wait 48 weeks before their cases come to trial, almost a year. Between 2014 and 2023, so entirely on the Tories' watch, waiting times for cases in relation to the crimes of rape, murder and GBH all rose by an average of 12 weeks. And I was minded to note that this time frame very much coincides with David Gawk's time as Minister of Justice, the last days of the Theresa May government from 2018 until Johnson took over in July of 2019. So he was literally part of the problem, but sure, get him in to come up with a solution to something he helped to screw up to begin with. That's bound to fill us all with confidence, isn't it? Of the murder trials held in this country last year, though, 36 were delayed. That in and of itself is an increase of 350% over 2014. This is the most egregious of crimes. And despite promises by the Tories to cut the backlog of cases by 7,000 in 2021, they actually saw an increase by more than 7,000, which is exactly what you expect from the Tories every time they are in power. Right now, there is a total backlog of more than 73,000 cases in England and Wales, and it is set to get even worse. So what is the solution to this that Starmer is apparently backing then? What did David Gawk and others, it has to be said, the Crown Prosecution Service itself for another, come up with by way of suggestions to solve this backlog? More money for the criminal justice system, more resources, some investment at last, paying barristers properly, having gone on strike themselves in recent times. How about just increasing the number of judicial sitting days? Maintaining the buildings. Let's just start with something simple and basic, just so they're running and able to be facilitated better. I mean, this is what the service needs, and all of that amounts to more money. So to nobody's surprise whatsoever, since we're talking both blue and red Tories here, that is absolutely not what they are proposing. No, what they are proposing is far worse. Is worse beyond silly, in fact, because to get the backlog down, some crimes will now no longer be subject to jury trials. Now, juries, you know, that group of people who decide between them whether or not you're guilty or innocent, doing away with them as the answer for certain crimes to get the backlog down. What crimes? Well, that is the subject of the review to be conducted by Brian Leveson. But right to trial by jury being considered to be dropped, at least in certain crimes, what kind of judiciary could contemplate such a thing? Especially in preference to just putting in the investment the service quite obviously needs. What kind of legal figure would consider doing such a thing? Well, Keir Starmer KC, apparently. Reviews don't just happen without his sign-off, of course. There's money for reviews when we already know lack of investment is the crux of the matter in the judiciary system. But more money is never an option where it is needed departmentally and in the services we all need and rely on. My barrister friend Jane Haybrook summed it up in one sentence on Twitter, saying, "What kind of Labour government, led by a PM who is a KC, proposes that the way to deal with the huge problems in the criminal justice system caused by years of underfunding is to do away with jury trials for some crimes? Good God!" She's far from the only one kicking off about this nonsense and aiming it squarely at Starmer, given his legal professional background. But equally, it's got others crawling out of the gutter to define their own warped views of what constitutes justice. And of course, Starmer can be blamed for a lot of this too, where he is constantly bashing migrants, cue the knuckle-draggers with union flags in their bios, squealing about locking up illegals and bringing back the death penalty. The only saving grace here is that Brian Leveson is involved, but his remit really isn't anything to cheer about. I hope it points out precisely, though, the problems in the service, and that they cannot be solved by cutting corners, because what will happen is more miscarriages of justice. And when lives could face ruin for the sake of yet another government refusing to invest in the nation's needs, it simply isn't going to be acceptable. We need real change. Yet again, Keir Starmer shows us he absolutely isn't it. Meanwhile, it isn't just ministers and those they've hired to help them do their jobs that are cracking the country up at the seams and bringing shame upon their departments, not to mention the country. Sometimes they end up employing people so apparently egregious you literally have to hear them to believe them, such as the deranged rant of David Lammy's Spad when he was pushing a book some years ago with views so appalling. How he now works in government, let alone the Foreign Office, is a question we all deserve answers to. See it for yourself, hear it with your own ears in this video recommendation here as your suggested next watch. Please do like, share and subscribe to the channel as well before you do so if you haven't done so already, and help support this channel. It really is massively appreciated, and I'll hopefully catch you on the next video. Cheers folks.